Detroit was not always a symbol of decline. For much of the 20th century, it stood as the embodiment of American ambition, industrial might, and middle-class prosperity. This was the city that put the world on wheels, that transformed the automobile from a luxury curiosity into an essential tool of modern life. At its peak, Detroit was home to nearly 2 million people, a dense urban core surrounded by thriving neighborhoods where factory workers could afford homes, cars, and a comfortable life for their families. The skyline rose with Art Deco towers and grand theaters. The streets hummed with activity. Money flowed through the economy like electricity through copper wire, powering a dream that seemed indestructible. The story begins in the early 1900s, when Detroit emerged as the epicenter of automotive innovation. Henry Ford's Highland Park plant introduced the moving assembly line in 1913, revolutionizing not just car manufacturing, but the entire concept of industrial production. The Model T rolled off the line in numbers that seemed impossible, and it became a new economic philosophy. Ford paid his workers $5 a day, double the prevailing wage, creating a workforce that could actually afford to buy the products they built. This was the foundation of the American middle class, a compact between capital and labor that would define the nation for decades. General Motors, Chrysler, and dozens of smaller manufacturers followed, establishing Detroit as the undisputed motor city. The decades that followed brought unprecedented growth. During World War II, Detroit became the arsenal of democracy, its factories churning out tanks, aircraft, and military vehicles that helped win the war. When peace returned, the auto industry exploded. Demand for cars seemed limitless. Suburban expansion, interstate highways, and cheap gasoline created an economy built around the automobile. And Detroit sat at the center of it all. The city's population swelled past 1.8 million by 1950. Neighborhoods like Hamtramck, Brightmoor, and the East Side were packed with workers and their families. The factories ran multiple shifts. Overtime was plentiful. A high school graduate could walk into a plant and earn enough to buy a house, raise children, and retire with a pension. This was a promise of Detroit, and for a time, it delivered. But beneath the prosperity, fractures were already forming. Detroit's success was built on a specific model of industrial capitalism that assumed eternal growth, stable demand, and American dominance in global manufacturing. These assumptions would not hold. By the 1960s, automation began transforming production line. Robots and computerized systems could perform tasks that once required human hands and human judgment. Fewer workers were needed to produce the same number of vehicles. This was efficient for the companies, but devastating for the workforce. Jobs that had supported entire families began to disappear, not because the factories closed, but because machines replaced people. At the same time, globalization introduced new competition. Japanese and European automakers, rebuilding after the war, began producing smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles that appealed to American consumers, especially after the oil shocks of the 1970-cent gas prices soaring. Detroit's Big Three were slow to adapt, continuing to focus on large, gas-guzzling sedans and trucks, while foreign competitors captured market share. The economic model that had seemed so secure began to crumble. Plants that once ran 3 shifts cut back to 2, then 1, then closed entirely. The layoffs came in waves, each one stripping more income from the local economy, more customers from the stores, more tax revenue from the city's coffers. Suburbanization accelerated the exodus. As highways expanded and car ownership became universal, families who could afford to leave the city did so, drawn by the promise of larger homes, better schools, and safer streets in places like Livonia, Warren, and Bloomfield Hills. This was not unique to Detroit, but it happened with particular intensity here. The federal government subsidized this flight through highway construction and mortgage policies that favored suburban development while neglecting urban cores. The GI Bill and FHA loans made homeownership accessible to millions of white Americans, but these same programs systematically excluded black families through redlining and discriminatory lending practices. Detroit's black population, which had grown significantly during the Great Migration as Southern families moved north seeking factory jobs and escape from Jim Crow, found themselves trapped in increasingly segregated neighborhoods with declining services and limited opportunities. Racial tensions simmered through the 1950s and 60s. Housing discrimination was rampant. Black families were confined to certain neighborhoods and charged higher rents. Police brutality was routine. Employment discrimination meant black workers were often the last hired and first fired. Schools in black neighborhoods received fewer resources. The social contract that promised prosperity to anyone willing to work hard was revealed as selective, extended to some, and denied to others based on the color of their skin. In July of 1967, the tension exploded. What began as a police raid on an unlicensed bar in a predominantly black neighborhood on 12th Street escalated into 5 days of unrest that would become one of the deadliest civil disturbances in American history. Buildings burned. Stores were looted. The National Guard and federal troops occupied the city. When the smoke cleared, 43 people were dead, more than 1,000 injured, and entire blocks lay in ruins. The uprising was not random violence, but a response to decades of systemic oppression, economic exclusion, and police aggression. Yet the dominant narrative framed it as lawlessness and chaos, cementing Detroit's reputation as dangerous and unlivable in the minds of many Americans. The flight from the city accelerated dramatically. White families left in massive numbers, taking their income, their tax dollars, and their political power with them. Between 1960 and 1970, Detroit lost nearly 200,000 white residents. Businesses followed. Retail districts that had once thrived began to empty. The tax base collapsed. The city government, suddenly responsible for maintaining the same infrastructure and services with far less revenue, began cutting back. Streets went unrepaired. Police and fire departments shrank. Schools deteriorated. A vicious cycle took hold where decline bred more decline, each departure making the city less viable for those who remained. The 1970s and 80s brought further devastation. The oil crises exposed the vulnerability of an economy built entirely on automotive manufacturing. Gas lines and soaring fuel prices killed demand for the large American cars Detroit specialized in. The big three lost billions. Plant closures became routine. Entire neighborhoods, once dense with workers, began to empty. Homes were abandoned. First a few, then dozens and hundreds, then entire blocks. Without residents, there were no customers for local businesses. Without businesses, there were no jobs. Without jobs, more people left. The city's population, which had already been falling, went into free fall. By 1990, it had dropped below 1 million. By 2000, it was under 950,000. The city that had once been America's fourth largest was hemorrhaging residents at a rate almost unprecedented in American history. The physical landscape transformed into something surreal. Block after block of abandoned homes stood with boarded windows and collapsing roofs. Once grand theaters and office buildings sat empty, their lobbies filled with debris and pigeon droppings. The Michigan Central Station, a magnificent Beaux-Arts structure that had been a symbol of Detroit's golden age, became an international icon of urban decay, its broken windows staring out over an increasingly empty city. Entire neighborhoods returned to prairie. Where houses once stood, grass and trees grew wild. The city's footprint, built for nearly 2 million people, now held barely 700,000. Services became nearly impossible to maintain. Police response times stretched to an hour or more. Fire departments couldn't keep up with arson. Street lights went dark because the city couldn't afford to maintain them. The human cost was immeasurable. Those who left Detroit often did so reluctantly, abandoning homes they'd invested in, neighborhoods where they'd raised children, communities where they had roots. They left because the jobs were gone, because the schools were failing, because crime made daily life frightening, because the basic functions of urban civilization had broken down. Those who stayed, disproportionately poor and black, faced worsening conditions with fewer resources. Unemployment in some neighborhoods reached 40%. Poverty rates climbed above 30% citywide. The murder rate soared, making Detroit one of the most dangerous cities in America. Generations of children grew up surrounded by abandonment and violence, their opportunities constrained by geography and the failures of systems that should have protected them. The political response was inadequate and often counterproductive. City leadership, both black and white, struggled with problems that exceeded their capacity to solve. Corruption scandals further eroded public trust and wasted scarce resources. State and federal governments, having subsidized the suburban exodus through highway spending and mortgage policies, offered little help to the cities they had hollowed out. The prevailing ideology of the era emphasized personal responsibility and market solutions, while ignoring the structural factors that had created the crisis. Detroit was often framed as a failure of urban governance rather than a casualty of larger economic forces. By the early 21st century, Detroit had become a symbol, a cautionary tale invoked in political debates about the failures of cities, unions, and democratic governance. This narrative was both inaccurate and incomplete. Detroit's collapse was not the result of any single policy or party, but the confluence of automation, globalization, racial injustice, suburban flight, and the transformation of the American economy from manufacturing to services. It was a failure of the entire system, of an economic model that concentrated wealth and opportunity in a single industry and a single region, then offered no safety net when that industry faltered. It was a failure of racial justice, of a society that excluded Black Americans from the prosperity it promised to all. It was a failure of urban policy, of governments that subsidized sprawl while allowing cities to decay. In 2013, Detroit filed for bankruptcy, the largest municipal bankruptcy in American history. The city owed $18 billion to creditors and pension funds. Basic services had nearly ceased. The bankruptcy was humiliating but necessary, a legal process that allowed the city to restructure its debts and begin, however haltingly, to rebuild. Pensions were cut. Art from the Detroit Institute of Arts was nearly sold to pay creditors, saved only by a coalition of philanthropists who raised hundreds of millions to protect the collection. The bankruptcy was a low point, but also a turning point. In the years since, something unexpected has happened. Detroit has begun, slowly and unevenly, to recover. Downtown and Midtown have seen significant investment. Young professionals, artists, and entrepreneurs have moved in, attracted by cheap real estate and the opportunity to build something new in the ruins of the old. Tech companies have opened offices. Restaurants and galleries have opened. The Packard plant, once a notorious symbol of decay, is being redeveloped. The Michigan Central Station, abandoned for 3 decades, has been renovated by Ford Motor Company as a hub for mobility research. Population decline has slowed. Some neighborhoods are stabilizing. This recovery is real but limited. Much of it is concentrated in a few square miles of downtown and Midtown, while vast stretches of the city remain abandoned. The new Detroit emerging in the core is whiter and wealthier than the city as a whole, raising questions about who benefits from recovery and who gets left behind. Long-time residents who endured the worst years sometimes find themselves priced out as property values rise. The challenges remain enormous. The population is still below 700,000. Poverty remains pervasive. The school system still struggles. But there is movement, energy, and a sense that the city's story is not finished. Detroit's abandonment was not inevitable. It was a result of choices, policies, and economic forces that could have been different. It happened because automation and globalization destroyed jobs without creating new opportunities for displaced workers. It happened because racism excluded Black Americans from full participation in the city's prosperity and then blamed them for its decline. It happened because suburbanization siphoned resources from cities and created unsustainable sprawl. It happened because leaders at every level failed to respond adequately to a crisis decades in the making. Understanding this matters because Detroit's story is not unique. Other industrial cities have faced similar challenges. The forces that hollowed out Detroit continue to reshape the American economy, destroying some places while enriching others, concentrating wealth and opportunity in ways that leave millions behind. The people who abandoned Detroit did not do so because they lacked courage or commitment. They left because the systems that should have sustained them failed. The workers who lost jobs to automation were not lazy. They were victims of technological change without adequate transition support. The families who fled to the suburbs were responding rationally to economic incentives and perceived safety concerns created by policy choices. The Black residents trapped in declining neighborhoods were not responsible for urban decay, but rather its victims, denied the opportunities and resources that might have allowed them to thrive. Detroit's story is a collective failure, and its recovery, however incomplete, demonstrates that renewal is possible when investment, leadership, and community will align. The city that remains is smaller, poorer, and more uncertain than the Detroit of the Golden Age, but it endures. In the empty lots and rebuilt neighborhoods, in the artists and entrepreneurs building something new, in the long-time residents who never left, there's a different kind of resilience. Detroit's abandonment teaches us about the fragility of prosperity, the cost of inequality, and the importance of systems that support all people, not just some. Its tentative recovery reminds us that cities are not just buildings and infrastructure, but communities of people who can, given support and opportunity, rebuild what was lost. Subscribe to Atlas Explained for more interesting videos. If you want to know about any city or country, comment your name, where you're watching from, and what you want to explore next.